She drove into the mist with no intention of turning back. He lived in the shadows of a garage, fixing what others left broken. One was a woman the world had already judged. The other, a man who had stopped expecting anything good to last. But when their paths collided, quite literally on the edge of a quiet lake in Vermont, neither of them knew that an engine wouldn't be the only thing they'd rebuild. This is a story about second chances, the quiet power of kindness, and the love that grows not in grand gestures, but in small, steady acts that change everything. If you believe in stories that heal, stay with us till the end. And if you enjoy this kind of heartwarming, emotional storytelling, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've got many more stories like this coming your way, so grab a warm drink, get comfortable, and let's begin the story. A poor mechanic found a woman beside a burning car. She turned out to be the richest woman in town. The mist rolled in thick and silent over Crescent Lake, swallowing the winding road that traced its northern shore. The leaves of early October blazed in reds and golds beneath the haze, their brilliance muted under the weight of fog. Nathaniel Sawyer, sleeves rolled to his elbows and hands greasy from a late oil change, stepped outside his modest garage to stretch his back. The night air was cold, the kind that crept into bones and stayed there. He breathed in deeply. The scent of pine and engine oil lingered on him like old memories. Somewhere in the stillness, an owl called once and then fell silent. He glanced at the lake, mostly obscured by mist, and was about to head back inside when something pierced the quiet. A scream of metal, the crunch of impact, and a splash. Nate froze. Then he ran. Down the gravel path past the sycamores, boots thudding against wet earth, heart pounding like a war drum. His flashlight flickered in his hand, weak against the darkness and fog. He reached the boat ramp just in time to see the dying glow of headlights beneath the lake's surface, bubbles rising violently to the top. Without hesitation, Nate kicked off his boots, tore off his flannel shirt, and dove in. The cold punched the breath from his lungs, an icy grip that made his muscles seize. He pushed forward anyway. The car was nose down in the lake bed, a black SUV, rapidly sinking, the passenger window cracked just enough. He yanked at the door. It fought him, then gave way. Inside, a woman was slumped over the wheel, unmoving, blonde hair drifting like seaweed around her pale face. He reached in, fingers numb and clumsy, struggling with the seatbelt. His lungs screamed. The clasp resisted. Then, click. He pulled her to him and kicked hard toward the surface, her weight dragging against him like regret. They broke through the lake into the cold night air. She wasn't breathing. "Come on," he rasped, dragging her onto the slick rocks by the ramp. "Don't you die on me." He tilted her head, began compressions. The night pressed close around them, heavy with silence and mist. Then finally she gasped, coughed, choked up lake water. She blinked, dazed, then went limp again. Nate sagged in relief, breathless. He wrapped her in his flannel, scooped her into his arms, and walked the path home, her soaked body cradled against him. Inside the warm clutter of Sawyer Auto and Boat Repair, the woman lay on a worn-out cot near the wood stove. Nate had dried her hair with an old towel, changed her into an oversized sweatshirt and sweatpants from a forgotten box of donations. Her skin was cold, but her breathing had steadied. Nate sat nearby, still damp himself, the adrenaline fading into quiet disbelief. "Who drives this late on that road?" he muttered. "And what the hell happened?" She didn't answer. Just lay there, her face slack in sleep, her fingers twitching with unconscious memory. Nate stood to check the remnants of her purse. What was left of it? It had floated ashore behind them, soaked but intact. No wallet, no phone, just a notebook, water-damaged but legible. Inside, scribbles, unsent letters, and one phrase over and over in faint, hurried ink. They took everything. He closed it with a shiver. Later that night, his mother, June Sawyer, came downstairs. Her silver hair was wrapped in a bun, her nightgown covered by a hand-knitted shawl that smelled faintly of lavender. "Nate," she called softly, "it's nearly 2 a.m. He turned to her, voice low. "Ma, there was a crash. A car went into the lake. She was inside." June's eyes widened as she moved closer to the cot. She looked down at the woman, mid to late 30s, delicate features, a face once beautiful but tired now, worn down. "She alive?" "Barely. June placed a gentle hand on the woman's forehead. She needs rest and kindness. Nate nodded. We'll give her both. They let her sleep. By morning, the fog had lifted, but the air remained sharp. Sunlight filtered in through the garage's dusty windows, illuminating rows of tools and old calendars pinned to wooden walls. Nate poured 2 mugs of black coffee, then returned to the cot. The woman was awake. She sat up slowly, blinking at her surroundings like a deer caught in unfamiliar woods. Her eyes met his. You're in my shop, Nate said gently, offering a mug. I'm Nate. You nearly drowned. She took the coffee with shaking hands. Her voice was dry, barely a whisper. I don't remember. I was driving, and then water. You hit the lake, he said. Lucky you landed where someone could hear it. She looked down into her mug. Lucky, she repeated, though it didn't sound like she believed it. Do you remember your name? A long pause, then softly. Evelyn. Evelyn Monroe. The name stirred something in Nate's mind. Familiar. Like a name from a news ticker or financial article, but the details escaped him. Well, Evelyn, you're safe now. She looked at him, eyes wary but grateful. She didn't ask questions about where she was or why he'd helped. She just sat there, clutching the mug like it was the only thing holding her together. Why'd you help me? She asked quietly. Nate shrugged. Because that's what people are supposed to do. She studied him, unsure if she believed him or not. Outside, the lake gleamed again under the morning sun. But inside that modest garage, something far more important had surfaced. 2 broken lives, colliding not in tragedy, but in quiet, unexpected grace. That night, Evelyn barely slept. Though exhaustion tugged at her bones, her mind refused to rest. She lay awake in the cot near the wood-burning stove, listening to the groan of old pipes and the occasional pop of embers settling in the firebox. Each sound echoed in the stillness like a reminder. She was alive, and she didn't know whether to be grateful or not. By morning, sunlight spilled through the garage's dusty windows, filtering into narrow beams that lit up the room like it had been waiting for her to see it. Somewhere in the back, metal clinked. The smell of coffee mingled with the earthy scent of motor oil and pine. Nate stood at his workbench, pouring 2 mugs. He looked over as she sat up, her face pale and uncertain under tangled hair. You made it through the night, he said softly. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Thanks to you. He walked over and handed her a mug. Strong stuff. Might burn a hole in your stomach, but it'll wake you up. She took a cautious sip and winced. You weren't kidding. A faint smile crossed his lips. Most people around here take it black. I keep sugar in the cabinet, but the lid's probably rusted shut. Evelyn let her fingers wrap around the ceramic for warmth. She looked around the space. Tools hanging in neat rows, papers stacked with surprising order, and a calendar on the wall still stuck in July. I don't suppose you have a phone? She asked, her voice hoarse. He tilted his head toward the wall-mounted rotary. No cell service this deep in the valley. That old thing still works, if you've got someone to call. Her eyes lingered on the phone. I don't know if I do. He didn't press. Instead, he nodded and sat on the stool across from her. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was careful. The kind shared between strangers who've glimpsed each other's deepest pain without understanding the full story. You're welcome to stay, he said at last, until you figure out your next step. She blinked. Why? Because that's what people should do. Help when they can. Evelyn frowned slightly as if kindness made her wary. I won't be a burden. You're not. A rustling sound broke the moment. June Sawyer stepped in, wrapped in a thick cardigan carrying a plate of warm muffins. I figured you'd both need something hot, she said cheerily. And no offense, Nate, but your coffee shouldn't be consumed without backup. Evelyn almost smiled. Thank you, ma'am. Just June, sweetheart. No need to be formal. They gathered around the small kitchen table tucked between the office and the workbench. It wasn't elegant, but it felt solid, lived in. The kind of space where time passed differently. Evelyn took a bite of the muffin. It was simple, spiced with cinnamon and something else she couldn't place. It melted in her mouth like warmth itself. This is wonderful, she said. June beamed. Family recipe. I always make extra. Never know when someone might need comfort food. Evelyn looked up, eyes glassy for a moment. I guess I do. June studied her gently. You look like someone who's been running a long time. Evelyn didn't deny it. Sometimes we think running makes the pain quieter, June continued, pouring herself a cup of coffee. But pain has a way of keeping pace. There was no pity in her tone, only recognition. Evelyn lowered her eyes. She wasn't used to being seen, not without judgment. Later that afternoon, Evelyn wandered the garage, fingers trailing over the edges of worn wooden benches and rows of screwdrivers arranged like tools in an operating room. She paused before a photograph on the wall. Nate, maybe 10 years younger, standing proudly next to a sleek white jet. A wide, hopeful grin stretched across his face. You were in aviation? She asked, her voice echoing slightly in the open space. Nate looked up from under the hood of an old pickup. Used to be. Aerospace engineering. We were working on hybrid propulsion models. That picture was taken right before our last flight test. What happened? He didn't answer right away. He wiped his hands on a rag, stood slowly, and leaned against the truck. I reported some bad numbers, he said finally. Supply chain was falsifying quality control data. Planes were being certified that shouldn't have been. When I brought it up, well, turns out integrity's expensive. Evelyn didn't speak. She just listened. They fired me. Lawsuits followed. Lost my job, my house, everything. Even my fiancé left. Said I was too bitter. He laughed once, low and humorless. Maybe I was. Evelyn stepped closer. They took everything. His head turned sharply. What? She swallowed. That's what I wrote. In my notebook. Over and over. Just those words. It was the only way I could convince myself that it wasn't my fault. Their eyes locked. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. They stood in a room that smelled of rust and firewood, with the buzz of a space heater in the background and autumn sunlight slipping through dusty windows. In that moment, they weren't mechanic and stranger, not even man and woman. They were survivors, witnesses to each other's wreckage. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of something. Not love, not yet, but something that mattered. The days fell into a rhythm Evelyn hadn't realized she craved. Mornings began with the scent of percolating coffee and June's cheerful humming in the kitchen. Afternoons passed in a quiet, steady cadence. Wrenches turning, country radio humming in the background, and the satisfying thunk of tool drawers opening and closing. Nights were calm, wrapped in thick quilts and the comforting crackle of the wood stove. Evelyn had spent years measuring time in quarterly reports, boardroom briefings, and red-eye flights. Now she measured it by how much grease was under her fingernails, how many bolts she could tighten correctly, how many times she caught herself smiling, genuinely, at something Nate said. She had offered to help around the shop on the third morning. I can't just sit here, she said, pulling her sleeves up to her elbows. Besides, I owe you. You don't owe me anything, Nate had replied, wiping his hands on a rag. But if you're going to hang around, I'm putting you to work. Just don't drop a wrench on your foot. She hadn't. Not yet, anyway. It turned out she had an eye for organization. In just one morning, she'd reorganized 2 cluttered tool drawers and labeled shelves Nate hadn't touched in years. He acted gruff about it at first, muttering something about finding things just fine. But deep down, he didn't mind. He even started giving her small tasks, holding parts steady, fetching tools, occasionally explaining engine diagrams with more patience than she expected. One afternoon, the sunlight was slanting golden across the gravel lot as Evelyn leaned over the open hood of a battered Chevy sedan. Nate stood beside her, pointing to the alternator with a socket wrench. All right, he said. Tell me how you'd test for a bad one. She squinted at the tangle of wires and belts. With a multimeter. Voltage reading while the engine's running, right? He gave her a surprised look. That's right. Most people can't remember that on the first try. Evelyn smirked. I may not look the part, but I've been doing my homework. You don't look the part, that's for sure, he said dryly. But you've got good instincts. Her smile softened, but there was something else behind it, something distant. Instincts were the only thing I had left. He looked at her. You don't have to keep proving yourself, you know. She shrugged. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just trying to remember who I am. That evening, as Nate packed up and turned off the shop lights, Evelyn lingered behind. She found herself staring once again at the photograph on the back wall, the one of Nate, younger and smiling, standing proudly in front of a sleek white aircraft. "You were in aviation," she said as he approached. "Used to be," he replied. "Aerospace engineer. That jet was part of a fuel efficiency project I worked on for 2 years." Her brow furrowed. "What happened?" He leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Long story. I found discrepancies in materials reports, some shady vendor contracts, safety issues being overlooked. I flagged it. You blew the whistle." "Yeah. Thought doing the right thing would count for something." He let out a short, dry laugh. "Turns out it just made me a liability. I got pushed out. Lawsuits, blacklisting. Lost my license. Lost my fiancée, too. She didn't sign up for poverty and scandal." Evelyn looked down, fingers brushing the edge of the counter. "They took everything." Nate blinked. "What?" She glanced up, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's what I wrote in the notebook. Over and over. They took everything. Like if I kept saying it, I could believe it wasn't my fault." Their eyes locked in the dim light of the garage. For a long moment, neither spoke. There was no need to. In the shared silence, something passed between them. A recognition of scars not seen, of losses no one else had validated. Nate finally broke the stillness. "They didn't take your integrity." She gave a soft, tired laugh. "Sometimes I think I left that behind too." "You didn't," he said. "I can see it, even if you can't yet." That night, Evelyn sat alone by the fire, a blanket draped around her shoulders, June's favorite chamomile steeping quietly in her cup. The flames flickered softly across the brick hearth, and through the small garage window, she could see the lake, black and still, cradled in mist. She thought about the woman she used to be, the woman who walked into conference rooms flanked by assistants and lawyers, who could read a market forecast like a second language. The woman who signed contracts without blinking, but who had slowly, quietly forgotten how to feel joy. That woman had driven her car toward the lake. This one, this version of herself, sat near an old stove, wearing a borrowed sweatshirt, hands smelling faintly of diesel and lemon soap. She didn't know what to make of that. But for the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't feel like running. The next morning, Nate found her already awake, sitting on the front steps of the shop with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the lake. "Early riser?" he asked, stepping outside. "I didn't want to miss the quiet," she said. "It's the only time my head feels still." He nodded, then stood beside her in silence, sipping his coffee. "You know," she said after a while, "you fix more than just engines in that garage." He turned, one brow raised. She didn't elaborate, just looked back toward the lake, the morning mist curling gently above the surface like breath. But she didn't need to explain, because some truths don't live in words. They live beneath the surface, steady and deep, just like the engines they'd been quietly repairing. The forest near Crescent Lake had begun its slow, dramatic transformation. Maple and birch trees stood in full regalia. Leaves turned into flames of gold, scarlet, and amber. The air held that crisp, woodsy scent of early October, a mix of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. There was something almost holy about the hush of the woods, as if nature itself held its breath before winter came to erase it all. Evelyn walked a step behind Nate on the narrow trail that wound through the trees behind the garage. They were supposed to be looking for a part, an old transmission mount someone had left near the fishing shack years ago, but neither of them seemed in a hurry. "Doesn't seem like a great place to store car parts," she said, stepping over a moss-covered log. Nate gave a half shrug. "You'd be surprised what people stash out here. Vermont folks are thrifty. Junk becomes treasure eventually." "Wah," she smiled. "Is that what you think I am? Salvageable?" Nate stopped, turned, and gave her a look that wasn't unkind. "I think everyone's got something left worth fixing." The words hit deeper than she expected. They walked in silence for a while, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting long golden stripes across the trail. For Evelyn, each step into the woods felt like a step further away from the world she'd left behind. Boardrooms, headlines, glass towers. None of that followed her here. They reached a clearing, a small ridge overlooking the lake. A lone bench sat weathered and mossy under a giant sugar maple. Nate dusted it off with his sleeve, motioned for her to sit. She did. He sat beside her, arms resting on his knees, eyes scanning the horizon. "You ever think," she began, "that your life was supposed to go one way, and then it just didn't?" Nate let out a breath. "Yeah, more times than I care to admit." She picked up a leaf from the bench, crimson red, edges curling. "I used to have a 5-year plan. Every quarter I'd review it, tweak it, add steps. Sounds exhausting." "It was." She paused. "But it made me feel like I had control." He nodded slowly. "And then? They turned on me. The board, the press, my partners. It didn't matter that I didn't sign off on the illegal acquisition. I was the face. I took the fall." She looked out at the lake. "I thought if I disappeared, it would all just quiet down." Nate didn't speak. He just waited. "I drove all night. I didn't have a destination. And then I saw the mist on the lake. It looked peaceful, like it wouldn't fight me." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind rustling high in the trees. "I wasn't trying to die," she said softly. "Not really. I think I just wanted to stop hurting." Nate finally looked at her. "I get that." "You do?" He hesitated. "The day I lost my license, I sat in my truck for 3 hours outside the FAA building. I had a bottle of whiskey in the glove box and nowhere to go. Thought about driving until I ran out of road." "What stopped you?" He gave a slow smile. "I remembered my mom. She just moved in with me. Didn't have her meds sorted yet. If I left, she'd have nobody. That's all it took. One person." Evelyn looked down. "Funny, isn't it? All it takes to hold on is one thread." "Yeah, but someone's got to offer it." They sat that way for a while, watching the wind ripple the lake below. Evelyn could feel something shifting inside her, a quiet loosening of the shame that had knotted itself into her chest for months. Not gone, but softening. "You've got good boots," Nate said suddenly. She blinked. "What?" He pointed. "Your boots, not the kind you buy at a department store. Hand-stitched soles. I'd say Italian." She laughed, caught off guard. "Trust you to notice footwear in the middle of an emotional reckoning." He grinned. "Details matter." Her laughter faded, replaced by a warm, lingering smile. "I'm glad you noticed." That evening, back at the garage, Evelyn found June tending to a pot of stew in the kitchen corner. The scent of thyme and bay leaf drifted through the space. "How was the woods?" June asked without turning. "Therapeutic," Evelyn replied, sitting on the worn bar stool. "Nate's good at silence." June chuckled. "He always was. Never talked much as a boy. But when he does speak, you ought to listen." Evelyn looked thoughtful. "He said something today about how everyone's got something worth fixing. I've been thinking about that." "Because it surprised you?" "Because it didn't." June turned from the stove and studied her. "Some folks carry their brokenness like a badge. Others bury it so deep they forget it's there. But every now and then, you find someone who's broken and still open. That's rare." Evelyn's voice was quiet. "That's what scares me." "What?" "That I could start wanting things again." June placed a bowl in front of her. "Then you're healing." Later that night, Evelyn stood alone in the garage, the hum of the shop's heater the only sound. She wandered over to Nate's tool wall, fingers brushing across polished handles and worn labels. She picked up a wrench, felt the weight of it in her hand. Heavy, balanced, real. It occurred to her then that maybe she didn't need to go back to who she was. Maybe she wasn't meant to. She wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. It started with a light bulb. More specifically, with the flickering one above the reading nook in the corner of the garage's office space. Evelyn had been rifling through a box of old invoices when she noticed it. An overhead fixture buzzing sporadically, like it couldn't decide whether to live or die. "I think your light's giving up on life," she called out to Nate, who was under a lifted truck, arms elbow deep in brake lines. "Been doing that for months," he replied. "I keep forgetting to fix it." Evelyn tilted her head at the space. It was cozy in its own way. A pair of cracked leather chairs, a short bookshelf crammed with manuals and paperbacks, and a worn rug faded by time. A corner meant for catching your breath. But it had been neglected, forgotten, just like she'd felt when she arrived. An idea sparked. That afternoon, she drove with June into town. Evelyn in the passenger seat of the old Ford, June behind the wheel with both hands gripping 10 and 2 like a pilot in crosswinds. "I'll never understand how they fit so many screws into one light fixture," June said as they exited the hardware store with a small bag of supplies. "That's the beauty of over-engineering," Evelyn quipped. "A solution looking for a problem." "You sound like Nate used to." Evelyn smiled, genuinely, fully, for the first time in what felt like months. It caught her off guard. Back at the garage, she spent the rest of the afternoon on her project. She replaced the faulty fixture, dusted the shelves, sorted the books, even sewed the torn armrest on one of the chairs using an old repair kit she found in a drawer. She didn't ask Nate for permission. She just did it. Because for once, it felt good to give something without asking whether it was worth the effort. When Nate walked in later that evening, he stopped short at the sight. The light above the corner glowed warmly now, casting an amber hue over the books and chairs. The rug had been beaten clean and repositioned. A folded quilt lay on the arm of one chair, and on the small table between them sat 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea and a single cinnamon muffin on a napkin. Evelyn looked up from the floor, where she was coiling an extension cord. "I thought this space deserved better." Nate blinked, clearly unsure what to say. Then after a moment, "It looks great. Want to test it out?" He hesitated, then nodded. They each settled into a chair. The cushions sighed under their weight. Evelyn picked up her mug and took a slow sip. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "You didn't have to do this," Nate said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but I wanted to. I needed to." He looked over at her. "Most people wouldn't." She shrugged. "I'm not most people." A beat of silence. Then he asked, "So what did you do before you drove your car into a lake?" She laughed, unexpected and real. "I was the chairwoman of a private equity firm." Nate nearly choked on his tea. "You're serious?" he asked. "Stonebridge Capital," she said, her tone flat. "Or, as the press calls it now, the empire that imploded." He whistled low. "And here I thought you were just good with socket sets. Turns out I'm also good at spectacular downfalls," she said, not bitterly, but almost with amusement. "But I was better at making things work, at building something that mattered." "I believe it." She looked at him. "You do?" Nate didn't answer right away. Instead, he took another sip of tea, then leaned back in the chair, letting his gaze settle on the soft light overhead. "Only people who've lost everything know what it means to want something real again." Evelyn swallowed hard. And then, almost as an afterthought, she said, "I think I might want to stay a little longer." The next morning, Nate found Evelyn kneeling beside an old mountain bike that had been leaning half forgotten against the side of the garage. "You planning to fix that too?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. She looked up. "It belongs to the neighbor's kid. I saw him trying to ride it yesterday. Chain kept slipping." Nate tilted his head. "You know what's wrong with it?" "Nope," she said, "but I figured I'd learn." "All right," he said, squatting down beside her. "Lesson 1, always check the derailleur." She grinned, the sun catching in her hair. "Sounds serious." "It is. Derailleurs don't mess around." That afternoon, the boy came by with wide eyes when he saw his bike standing straight and smooth, the chain freshly greased. "Whoa," he whispered. "You fixed it?" Evelyn nodded. "With a little help." "Thanks, lady," he said, and then rode off down the gravel path, wobbling but laughing. Nate watched the boy disappear, then turned to Evelyn. "That kid's dad lost his job last winter. They've been scraping by. That bike meant a lot." Evelyn nodded, still watching the trail. "Funny. You spend your whole life chasing billion-dollar deals and headlines, and then a $10 bike repair is what makes you feel human again." Nate said nothing, but he was watching her closely now. Something was changing in her, and not just the way she smiled more easily or stood straighter. She was remembering who she was before the world taught her to armor up. That night, June knocked lightly on Evelyn's door before bed and handed her a folded apron. "We're hosting a fall potluck next weekend," she said. "You're helping." Evelyn unfolded the apron. It had a stitched maple leaf over the heart. "I don't cook." "Then you'll learn," June said with a wink. "We've all got recipes worth saving." Evelyn looked down at the apron, her fingers grazing the fabric like it was something sacred. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't feel like a guest anymore. The rain began just after midnight. It was the kind that tapped gently on the tin roof of the garage, a soft percussion that made the world feel smaller, like it had wrapped itself in a blanket. Evelyn sat curled on the edge of the cot, her bare feet tucked under her, a cup of tea cooling beside her, untouched. On the desk across the room sat her damaged leather purse, the one Nate had salvaged from the lakeshore. She hadn't opened it since that night. There was no reason to. She knew what was inside, but now something tugged. She rose slowly, walked across the room and unzipped the side compartment. Her fingers brushed over damp receipts, faded lip balm, a key card to a downtown parking garage, and then she found it. A small, water-warped envelope with no name on the front, its seal broken, but the pages still folded. She returned to the cot, hands trembling slightly, and unfolded the letter she'd written the night before everything collapsed. "Dear William, if you're reading this, it means I didn't send it in time. Or maybe I never found the courage. Maybe I already knew what you'd say. I trusted you. I built that trust brick by brick over a decade, and you swept it away with one deal, one lie. And then you stood by while the headlines buried me. You stood silent while I was blamed. I kept thinking you'd call, that you'd say, 'It was me, I'll fix it.' But the call never came. I've spent years making sense of markets, solving impossible puzzles. But I can't solve this. Not the betrayal, not the silence. You didn't just cost me my career. You took my name, my belief in loyalty, in justice, in people. I hope someday this letter haunts you, not because I want revenge, but because I want you to know I deserve better. Evelyn." She stared at the words, each one a ghost, a scream she never let out. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't hear the door creak until Nate's voice broke the quiet. "You okay?" Evelyn didn't move. "Couldn't sleep." He stepped in, his flannel shirt open over a white undershirt, hair slightly tousled. "Yeah, me neither. Rain gets in my bones." She held the letter in both hands, eyes unfocused. "I wrote this to the man who ruined me. Never mailed it." Nate didn't speak. He simply lowered himself into the chair opposite her and waited. "I thought if I sent it, it would make me feel powerful again," she said. "But I couldn't do it. I didn't want him to think he still had space in my life." Nate leaned forward. "So why keep it?" Evelyn looked down at the page. "Maybe I needed the reminder, that it wasn't all in my head." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes we don't write to be heard. We write to hear ourselves." She glanced up, meeting his gaze. "You ever write one? A letter?" he asked. "Yeah. Wrote one to the FAA ethics board the night before the hearing. Never sent it." "What did it say?" He exhaled through his nose. "Mostly things I was too angry to say out loud. But one line stuck with me." He paused. "I said, 'If doing the right thing costs me everything, then I hope I never stop paying.'" Evelyn swallowed. "Did it? Cost me everything?" He looked around the garage. "Pretty much. But I'm still here. Guess that counts for something." She folded the letter slowly and placed it on the table. "I don't think I want to be angry anymore," she whispered. Nate looked at her for a long moment. "You don't have to forget what happened, but maybe it's time to stop carrying it alone." Evelyn stared at the folded paper for a beat, then reached over, held it above the wood stove, and let go. The flames caught instantly. She didn't look away. Neither did Nate. The next morning the sky was washed clean, a blue so sharp it seemed painted. The lake shimmered under the early sun, steam rising like breath from the cold surface. Evelyn joined June in the kitchen, the smell of pancakes thick in the air. "You look lighter," June said, sliding a plate onto the table. "I slept," Evelyn replied, as if surprised by the admission. June poured coffee, her eyes kind but sharp. "Sometimes the only way to stop something from haunting you is to name it, look it in the eye, and send it on its way." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I burned a letter." "Good," June said without missing a beat. "Fire's been healing people longer than therapy's been invented." They ate quietly for a few moments. Then Evelyn looked around the small kitchen, its wallpaper peeling at the corners, its shelves stacked with mismatched dishes, and felt a sense of peace she couldn't explain. "June," she said suddenly, "why did you let me stay? You didn't even know me." June wiped her hands on a towel. "Honey, there's two kinds of people in this world, those who run from broken things and those who reach for glue. I raised Nate to be the second kind. And I wasn't about to let him forget it. Evelyn blinked. You think I'm broken? I think you're rebuilding. And that takes guts most folks don't have. That afternoon, Evelyn stood in the center of the garage looking at the old workbench like it was a pulpit. A spark had returned to her, quiet but undeniable. She picked up a clipboard and began organizing parts lists. Nate raised an eyebrow as he passed. You working or pretending? Reorganizing your system, she replied. No offense, but it's a mess. Offense taken. She grinned. And for the first time when she looked at him, it wasn't with guarded appreciation or guilt-soaked gratitude. It was connection, the honest kind, the kind that only happens when both people have stopped pretending. The morning started like any other, bright, cool, and humming with quiet purpose. Evelyn was tightening a bolt on the wheel hub of a rusted pickup while Nate worked under the hood. The garage doors were rolled up, letting in the soft Vermont breeze and the sweet scent of wood smoke from someone's distant chimney. June was inside baking for the church fundraiser, and an old radio on the shelf played a mellow country tune that drifted through the garage like memory. You know, Nate said, emerging with grease on his jaw. You're getting good at this. Evelyn smirked. Don't sound so shocked. I used to run a billion-dollar firm. I can handle bolts and brake pads. He laughed softly, straightening. Most people can't handle their egos once they've done that. She opened her mouth for a comeback, but a strange smell interrupted her. Burnt plastic. Then came the hiss. Sharp. Wrong. Do you smell? She began. Yeah, Nate cut in, already moving. Electrical. A sharp crack split the air. Behind them, near the back wall, where a stack of old wiring had been organized just days ago, flames erupted. Small at first, flickering orange against the shadows, but growing fast, licking up the wall like it had been waiting for oxygen. Fire extinguisher. Left wall. Nate barked. Evelyn was already sprinting. June appeared in the doorway, coughing. What's? Get out of the building, Nate shouted. Evelyn grabbed the extinguisher, pulled the pin, and began spraying, coughing through the smoke. Nate grabbed a second one and joined her. Together they fought it back, foam and noise and heat. For several minutes, there was only chaos. The roar of fire, the hiss of the foam, the acrid sting of melted wire and singed wood. When the smoke finally cleared, the back corner of the shop was blackened and scorched, but the fire was out. Evelyn was hunched over, hands on her knees, catching her breath. Her sweatshirt was smeared with ash, her face streaked with sweat and soot. Nate coughed hard and leaned against the workbench, his chest heaving. You okay? He asked hoarsely. She nodded. You? I will be. June came running from outside, wrapped in a blanket offered by a neighbor. The fire department's on the way, she said, eyes wide. Someone saw the smoke and called it in. Nate nodded. Good. We've got it contained. But it wasn't over. Because as the sirens neared and the first responders arrived, a man in a tailored coat and polished shoes stepped out of the crowd, forming near the road. He didn't look like a local. He looked like Wall Street had dropped him in the middle of Vermont by mistake. He stopped when he saw Evelyn, and then slowly raised his phone and took a photo. Evelyn froze. Nate noticed her face shift, color draining, eyes narrowing. Who is that? He asked. She didn't answer. Another camera flashed, and then a woman's voice behind them, half whisper, half audible. Is that her? That's Evelyn Monroe, isn't it? Evelyn turned sharply. Please don't. But it was too late. Within minutes, her name was echoing through the small crowd like wildfire. Someone was already pulling up articles on their phone. Monroe, wasn't she the one involved in that Stonebridge scandal? I thought she disappeared. Is this where she's been hiding? Nate stood beside her, jaw clenched. You want to explain what's happening? Evelyn looked at him. Her face was calm, but her eyes were a storm. I didn't tell you, she said slowly, because I didn't want to be her anymore. The reporters arrived within the hour. 2 local news vans, a blogger with a handheld camera, and someone live streaming from their phone. The fire was already yesterday's news. What mattered now was that Evelyn Monroe, disgraced Wall Street executive, had been found in a small-town garage in Vermont, dressed like a mechanic. She refused every interview. She closed the garage door. She didn't speak to anyone. Nate followed her inside. the sound of shouting muffled by the thick roll of the garage bay door slamming shut. "You should have told me," he said. Evelyn sat on the edge of the workbench, face pale. "I was trying to start over. I could have helped you handle it." "No, Nate, you would have looked at me differently." He was quiet for a long moment. Then softly, "And what makes you think I haven't already?" That cut deeper than she expected. She stood, hands clenched. "You think I came here with a plan? I didn't. I was falling apart. I was ready to give up." "I know," he said. "I was there." Evelyn shook her head, voice trembling. "I was finally feeling like I could breathe again, that I could be someone without a title, without a brand. And now it's all back. You're still the woman who helped fix that boy's bike, who organized my mess of a workshop, who saved June from smoke inhalation today." He took a breath. "You're more than what you ran from." She blinked, tears threatening. "But what if no one else sees that? Then they're not looking hard enough." That night, the garage stood quiet. The scorched back wall had been sealed with plywood, and the scent of smoke still lingered in the air. But there was a new kind of silence between them, one that wasn't made of mistrust, but of bruised honesty. Evelyn sat on the front steps, wrapped in June's quilt, staring out at the lake. Nate joined her without a word. For a long time, they sat without speaking. Finally, she said, "Everything I tried to bury came back today." Nate nodded. "But you didn't run." "No," she whispered. "I didn't." He turned toward her. "That matters." She looked at him, tired but clear-eyed. "You're still here." "Yeah," he said. "I'm still here." And somehow that was enough. The rain returned 2 days after the fire, this time steady and gray, falling in rhythmic waves that blurred the lines between lake and sky. The tourists had gone. The news vans had left. But the echoes lingered. Inside the garage, everything was in limbo. Nate hadn't reopened the doors since the fire. The smell of smoke had mostly faded, but a bitter trace still clung to the rafters, like something that didn't want to be forgotten. Evelyn hadn't spoken much either. They'd spent the days moving slowly, fixing small things, sipping coffee in silence, walking the edge of the lake without a destination. June gave them space. She knew the weight of invisible burdens and had learned long ago that words couldn't always lift them. On the third morning, Evelyn stood by the dock, rain falling around her in delicate sheets. She wore her borrowed coat, boots slick with wet leaves, hands deep in her pockets. The lake stretched quiet and endless before her. Nate approached from the path, umbrella tilted against the wind. "You'll get soaked," he said. "I already am." He stood beside her for a moment, letting the silence settle. "I'm not angry," he said quietly, "in case you're still wondering." Evelyn didn't look at him. "You should be. I lied." "You hid. That's different." She turned toward him, rain streaking across her cheek like tears. "I was ashamed of who I was, of how fast everything fell apart." Nate didn't respond right away. The rain on the water filled the space between them with something gentle and steady. "Do you know why I stayed here after everything?" he asked finally. "Because it was safe?" He shook his head. "Because it was small, because it didn't ask me to be anything I couldn't be." She stared at the horizon. "I envy that. You could choose it too." Her jaw tightened. "I don't know who I am without the fight, without the pressure, the headlines, the stakes, the battles. I hated them, but they made me feel real." Nate looked at her, rain collecting in the lines around his eyes. "Then maybe it's time to find out who you are without them." That afternoon, Evelyn sat at the old wooden desk in the back office with a fresh notebook and a pen that didn't skip. She stared at the first blank page for a long time before writing a single sentence. "This is who I am when no one is watching." Then she stopped, not because she didn't know what came next, but because she wanted to think before defining herself again. Outside, the rain persisted. It drummed against the roof with the constancy of a heartbeat. The lake swelled slightly. The fire-damaged corner of the shop remained untouched, as if waiting for them to decide whether it would be restored or left behind. Nate entered quietly with a box of old paperwork and settled across from her. "Cleaning out the archives?" she asked. "Trying. Most of this is receipts and manuals from the 90s. He pulled out a faded newspaper clipping and smiled faintly. "Here's one. My dad, back when he ran this place. They called him the man who could bring anything back to life. Evelyn looked at the photo, an older version of Nate, standing with a wrench in hand, grease on his chin, and that same stubborn warmth in his eyes. "You look like him," she said. "Sometimes I wonder if I'd disappoint him." Evelyn frowned. "Why would you?" "Because I lost everything. The job, the license, the future." She leaned back. "Maybe he wouldn't care what you lost. Maybe he'd care about what you chose to rebuild." Nate looked at her for a long moment. Then he set the clipping aside. "You know," he said, "I always thought you had to fight to matter. But maybe the fight isn't always outside." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Maybe it's the fight to be still, to stay, to be seen without shouting." That evening, as the rain began to fade into a steady mist, June made stew and poured 3 glasses of red wine. They sat at the small kitchen table, candles flickering between them, casting shadows that danced across the walls. "I got a call today," Evelyn said, swirling her glass slowly, "from someone on my old board." June looked up, surprised. "How'd they find you?" "The fire," Evelyn replied. "Apparently my face was good for ratings again." Nate's jaw tightened. "What did they want?" "A statement. An appearance, maybe. Something that shows I'm not hiding." June raised an eyebrow. "Are you?" Evelyn met her eyes. "No, not anymore." She took a breath. "I'm going to the city, just for a few days. Not to take back anything, just to face it, on my terms." Nate was quiet for a long time. Then, "You'll come back?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I'll try." That night before sleep, Evelyn stood by the window in the spare bedroom, looking out over the lake. The moon had broken through the thinning clouds, casting a silver sheen across the water. The reflection trembled slightly in the breeze, but it held. She thought of the woman who had driven into the mist, ready to disappear. And then she thought of the woman who had stayed. Not the one from the headlines, not the one from the boardroom, but the one who now knew how to use a wrench, who saved a life from smoke, who burned a letter instead of carrying its weight. There was still so much left to face, but she wasn't running anymore. The first snow arrived early that year. Just a dusting, barely enough to coat the rooftops or linger on the pines. But it carried the hush of winter, the way the world seems to hold its breath before the cold settles in. Crescent Lake mirrored a pewter sky, and the air carried the clean scent of something new beginning. Nate stood under the garage awning, sipping coffee from a dented thermos, watching his breath mingle with the morning chill. The shop had reopened 2 weeks ago, quietly. No announcement, no apology. It was just open. People came, not for the fire story, not for gossip. They came because Nate never stopped fixing what others left behind. He hadn't spoken to Evelyn since the night she left. No texts, no updates, no promises. Just that last soft, "I'll try," echoing in his mind like a note that never resolved. He hadn't expected her to return, but he'd kept the corner she cleaned still tidy. The reading light still worked. The blanket she folded still lay over the arm of the chair. And every time he made tea in the afternoon, he poured 2 mugs just in case. That afternoon, as the sky darkened into a slow-falling snow, Nate was in the middle of tuning a carburetor when something made him pause. It wasn't a sound, it was a feeling. He looked up. The garage doors were open wide to let in the winter air, and outside, framed by the soft gray light and the whispering snowfall, stood Evelyn. No suitcase, no umbrella, no press. Just her. She wore a simple wool coat, unbuttoned. Her hair had grown slightly longer, tucked behind her ears. Her expression was unreadable, except for the way her eyes softened when they met his. She didn't move. Neither did he. For a moment, the world was just 2 people, separated by a few feet in several thousand unspoken words. Then Nate set down the wrench and walked toward her. Not quickly, not urgently, just steadily, like he'd known this moment would come, and he didn't want to startle it. He stopped a step away. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she replied. "How was the city?" She took a breath. Loud, fast, familiar. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "I didn't go to find anything," she said. "I went to see if it still owned me." "And?" Her smile was quiet. "It doesn't." A flake of snow caught in her hair. She didn't brush it away. "I stayed with an old friend," she said. She offered me a seat back at the table, said the firm is restructuring under new leadership. Clean slate, high salary, prestige, headlines. Nate waited. I told her I'd think about it, she continued. Then I packed a bag and left it on the hotel bed. His breath caught, just barely. I didn't come back with a plan, she added, or answers, just this feeling that I wasn't done here. Nate's voice was low. You're not. Evelyn swallowed. I don't want to be the woman who disappears. Not anymore. And I don't want to be the headline either. I want to be useful, present, honest. He stepped aside just enough to gesture toward the open garage. We've got a radiator leak on a Civic and a snowblower that sounds like a dying goose. She blinked, then laughed. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a wrench and a place to sit. The rest is up to you. She stepped forward, and as she passed him, her arm brushed his. They didn't hug, they didn't kiss, but they didn't need to. Some returns don't require ceremony, only presence. That evening, Evelyn sat in the corner she had restored, hands wrapped around a mug of hot cider, watching the light flicker across the old tools and books. June came in from the kitchen, holding a dish towel, and paused when she saw her. Well, she said, smiling warmly, you didn't even knock. I didn't want to jinx it, Evelyn replied. June walked over and kissed her gently on the head. Welcome home, sweetheart. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. She didn't know if this was forever. But it was enough for now. And sometimes, now is the bravest thing a person can choose. A week after Evelyn returned, the garage looked almost the same. But everything had changed. Nate still worked under hoods and over brake lines. June still baked too much and insisted everyone eat seconds. But Evelyn had begun sketching something new. Not in secret, not quietly, but at the center table, in plain sight. Most mornings, she spread out blueprints, legal pads, and a stack of sticky notes over the workbench between repair manuals and wrenches. When Nate asked what she was working on, she simply said, something useful. By the second week, he knew better than to ask again. He knew better than to doubt her. One crisp afternoon, as snow dusted the gravel lot and a cardinal perched on the gas line, Evelyn rolled down the garage door and stood before Nate with a folder in her hand. He was elbow deep in a rusted snowblower, muttering curses under his breath. I'm not interrupting, am I? She asked with a small grin. You're always interrupting, he replied, standing and wiping his hands. What have you got? She held up the folder. A proposal for the Sawyer project. He blinked. Is that what you're calling it? You wouldn't name it after yourself, she said. So I did it for you. He opened the folder. Inside were plans, real ones. A training facility added to the rear of the garage. Workbenches converted for classroom use. A list of potential equipment donors. A scholarship fund, starting small but scalable. Evelyn, he murmured. She straightened. I've been on boards that raise billions. I've worked with city councils, corporate grant panels, and educational foundations. I know how to build something that lasts. And this matters. Nate looked at her, the wind brushing his hair, eyes narrowed in thought. What exactly are you trying to build? A second chance, she said simply, for kids who never got a first one, for people who never had someone to believe in them, for this town. He flipped through more pages, scanning budgets, timelines, partners. It was airtight, visionary, practical, kind. You did all this in 2 weeks? I've been designing it in my head since I saw that boy trying to fix his bike with a butter knife. Nate gave a low chuckle. That kid comes around every day now. Thinks you're some kind of wizard. I'll take it, she said, grinning. He set the folder down carefully. And what do you need from me? Your name, she said. Your space. Your belief. He studied her a long time, then nodded. You've got it. The news broke quietly, but deliberately. A small article in the local paper. Former Wall Street exec returns to Vermont. Launches skills program for rural youth. No scandal, no spin, just facts. Evelyn gave one quote. People are more than their worst moment, and sometimes the best work we do doesn't happen in offices, but in places with oil-stained floors and second chances. Nate read the article while sipping coffee at the back of the garage. When he finished, he folded it and tucked it into his toolbox. He didn't say a word, but he smiled. Within a week, volunteers came. Not many, but enough to clean out the old storage room and paint the back wall. Enough to string lights and wire up a projector. Enough to believe. Evelyn worked alongside them, sanding, scraping, hammering, laughing. She wore gloves like armor and carried a clipboard like a general. Nate swore she had more energy than the generator. "I didn't know you were handy with a power drill," he said one afternoon, as she secured a bracket to a new bench. "I used to negotiate leveraged buyouts while ordering lunch. I can handle multitasking." "Well," he said, tapping the wood, "this bench is solid. So's the mission." He looked at her, admiring the way her face lit up with purpose. It wasn't the same fire he'd seen in her when she first arrived, wild and barely contained. This was different, steady, rooted, true. On the day of the soft opening, the garage-turned-learning center was unrecognizable. The back room was now a bright, warm workshop space with wall-mounted tools, instructional diagrams, and a banner over the entrance. The Sawyer Project. For those who dare to begin again. They didn't host a ribbon cutting. Evelyn hated those. Instead, they opened the doors and let people wander in. A few teenagers, a retired mechanic, a single mother who wanted to learn basic car repair to stop being overcharged. They came. They stayed. They asked questions, and Evelyn smiled. At one point, she stepped outside for air, just as the sun began to set, casting long golden rays across the lake and the pine-lined horizon. She closed her eyes and breathed. Nate joined her, hands in his jacket pockets. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected. "No," he said, voice softer. "This part was you." She turned to face him. "Do you regret saying yes?" He smiled. "You taught me something." "Oh? You don't need to go back to who you were before everything broke. You can start again, as someone better." She felt her throat tighten. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. Not who I was. Just me." He reached for her hand, calloused, warm, and sure. Their fingers interlaced naturally, like something they'd done for years. And in the quiet, just before dusk fell fully, Evelyn whispered, "This is the first time I've ever built something that felt like home." It began with a letter to the editor, just a short note printed in the back column of the Vermont North Chronicle, under the heading, "Small Miracles." "To the woman who fixed my daughter's car for free, thank you. She's 17, a new driver. She'd been saving for months to buy that old Honda. When it died on the way to school, you didn't just fix her engine. You gave her back her independence. And I watched her drive away with tears in her eyes, not because the car worked, but because someone believed she was worth the time. Grateful mom in North Shore." That was all it took. In the weeks that followed, letters came in regularly. Some from nearby towns, some from former students who had taken Evelyn's weekend class on basic diagnostics. Others from older men who used to work with their hands but had lost the confidence to teach. A few came from people who had never even stepped foot in the garage, but had heard what was happening. And slowly the town began to talk. Not about Evelyn's past, but about her present. One Saturday morning, as a light snow dusted the lot and steam rose from the coffee cups on the counter, Evelyn hung a corkboard on the wall beside the front door. She called it the Board of Gratitude. At first, it held just one pinned note, the original letter from the mom in North Shore. By the end of the week, it held 37. The Sawyer Project didn't just teach repair. It taught repair of a different kind. Teenagers with nowhere to go after school found focus there. Veterans found purpose. Young women learned to change oil with confidence. One man, a recent widower in his 60s, came in with trembling hands and walked out smiling, saying, "I didn't think I had anything left to give." Evelyn kept track of each name. She started a map on the back wall, pinning red markers for every town represented by someone who stepped through the garage door. By Christmas, the pins had spread across 3 counties. One morning, Nate walked in to find a TV crew in the parking lot. He froze. "What's this?" Evelyn, adjusting a display rack of toolkits, looked up calmly. "PBS Regional. They're filming a special on community revitalization. Someone submitted our story." "Wasn't me," he said quickly. "No," she smiled. "It was June." At that moment, June entered from the side door with a plate of ginger cookies and a warm, unapologetic grin. "What? You boys never tell your own stories." "Someone had to," Nate groaned, rubbing his face. They better not want me on camera. An hour later, he was in front of it anyway. The interviewer asked him only one question. Why did you say yes? Nate hesitated, then looked at Evelyn, who stood at the edge of the frame, holding a toolbox with both hands like it grounded her. Because sometimes, he said slowly, you fix a car, and it's just a car. But sometimes you fix something, and the person who walks out is a little stronger than when they walked in. That's what this place does, and that's why I stayed. The interviewer was quiet for a beat, then she lowered the mic and nodded. The segment aired 3 weeks later. Nate didn't tell anyone to watch it, but by the next day, the voicemail on the shop's phone was full. One message was from a guidance counselor at a high school 30 miles north. Another from a nonprofit in Boston looking to sponsor trade kits. A third from a father who said his son hadn't smiled in 6 months until he took Evelyn's beginner's course and learned how to rebuild a lawnmower engine. The one that made Nate pause, though, came last. I just wanted to say thank you. My brother knew you from the aerospace program. He always said you were the kind of guy who did the right thing, even when it cost him. Seeing you still helping people now, it gave me hope again. Nate didn't say anything for a while after listening. Then he quietly deleted the message. Like holding on to it too long might make him forget the simplicity of why he did what he did. That night, he stood outside the shop, looking up at the sign newly painted above the door. Sawyer Auto and Learning Center. The same name, just widened, like the space had expanded to hold more than just cars. Evelyn stepped beside him, her gloved hands curled around a thermos. Do you ever think, she said softly, that maybe none of this would have happened if I hadn't hit the lake that night? Nate gave a slow smile. Then I guess I should be grateful for bad breaks. She nudged him. Don't get too poetic. He looked at her steady and warm. You changed things, Evelyn. Not just here. Not just with this program. You reminded people that redemption isn't a press release. It's a practice. She blinked, the cold stinging her eyes. You helped me believe in it again. They stood that way a while, watching the snow fall under the glow of the garage lights. Somewhere inside, a student's laughter echoed. A wrench dropped. June hummed a carol softly off-key. And outside, 2 people stood shoulder to shoulder, quiet witnesses to the miracle of rebuilding, not just what had burned, but what had been missing long before it ever caught fire. The snow had melted into spring. It came quietly as Vermont springs often did, soft and slow, with small signs at first. Robins returning, crocuses pressing up through stubborn patches of frost, and the lake shedding its icy skin. The garage had changed with the season. The Sawyer project now ran 5 days a week. Students came from towns Nate couldn't pronounce, wearing work boots too big and hearts too guarded. But they came. Evelyn taught 2 classes on electrical systems and 1 on business fundamentals. She still got grease on her hands, still laughed when someone dropped a socket into an engine block, and she still poured Nate's coffee every morning at 7:05 sharp. One afternoon in April, the town gathered at the lake for the spring picnic, a tradition revived after years of being forgotten. There were folding chairs and checkered blankets, coolers filled with lemonade, children playing tag under the budding trees. June served her famous apple cobbler with 2 scoops of ice cream, whether you asked for one or not. Evelyn wandered to the edge of the dock with Nate, a paper plate in one hand, the breeze lifting strands of hair from her neck. Looks different in the spring, she said, watching the sunlight sparkle across the lake. So do you, he said. She turned to him, half smiling. How? Less armor, same fire. She laughed quietly. You're getting poetic again. He shrugged. Must be the cobbler. Later that evening, long after the tables had been cleared and the children carried home, Evelyn returned to the dock alone. The water was calm, the air filled with the scent of pine and distant smoke. In her hand, she held a photo, slightly crumpled, edges worn. It was the one Nate had kept in his toolbox, him and his father, smiling in front of the aircraft. She had added a new one beneath it. It showed a group of students standing in the garage, their hands stained with oil, eyes bright with pride. At the center stood Nate, looking a little uncomfortable, a little overwhelmed, and entirely himself. Evelyn smiled. Behind her, footsteps approached. I thought you might be here, Nate said, joining her. He looked at the photo in her hand and nodded. It belongs together. She tucked it away carefully. Everything's different now. Yeah, but not all of it. They stood side by side, listening to the lapping of the lake. For a moment, Evelyn closed her eyes and let it all pass through her. Everything she had lost, everything she had gained, and everything she had chosen to leave behind. I don't miss that life, she whispered. I know, he said. I don't even think I miss who I was. You weren't meant to stay her. She turned toward him, voice barely audible. Do you ever think about the night it all started? Every day. She looked up. Do you regret it? He took a breath. I think that night didn't break anything. It just revealed what needed fixing. Evelyn nodded slowly. Even me? Especially you. As twilight deepened, they walked back toward the garage. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass. Somewhere in the distance, June's wind chimes caught the breeze. At the edge of the gravel lot, Evelyn stopped and looked at the building that had become more than just four walls and a workbench. It was now a classroom, a refuge, a second chance made of steel and kindness. I want to stay, she said. Nate turned to her, steady. You already have. She reached for his hand, and this time he didn't hesitate. Weeks later, on the morning of the first official open house for the Sawyer Project, people from across the county arrived. Teachers, journalists, students, and even a few skeptics. They toured the facility, met volunteers, watched demonstrations. Laughter bounced off the walls. Hands were shaken. Cameras clicked. At the end of the tour, someone asked Evelyn to say a few words. She stepped up to the small platform they had built out of repurposed pallets. Sunlight bathed the room. Nate stood in the back, arms crossed, watching. Evelyn took a breath. When I came here, she began, I was a woman with a past but no future. I had names people used, CEO, failure, scandal, but none of them fit. I was trying to disappear. She looked around the room, eyes meeting strangers and friends alike. But someone pulled me from the water, not just literally, but from the weight I was sinking under. He gave me tools not to fix engines, but to rebuild myself. She looked at Nate, and then he stood back and let me learn who I was, without pressure, without judgment, without ever needing me to be anyone other than who I already was. A long pause. That's what this place is. Not a program, not a publicity project, but a place where people get to start over, where what's under the hood of a car, of a life, is what truly matters. The applause was warm and lasting. That evening, when the last visitor had gone, and the lights were dimmed, and June had retreated with her knitting and hot cocoa, Evelyn and Nate stood once more at the dock beneath the stars. The lake was still, the air was cool, and for the first time in a long, long while, there was nothing left to fix. Only a future to build, together. Before you go, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city, your country, or even just a little hello in the comments. We read every single one, and it means more than you know. If this story touched you in any way, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories about kindness, love, and second chances. And thank you, truly, for spending your time with us. Until next time, take care and stay kind.